Ever wondered what language Jesus really spoke? Was he a simple Aramaic preacher, or a bilingual teacher moving seamlessly between worlds? Welcome to the Aramaic mystery. Was Jesus really bilingual? In this video, we'll journey back to 1st century Judea, exploring ancient scrolls, lost phrases, and surprising historical clues. Could Jesus have preached in Greek to reach wider audiences? Did he read Hebrew in the synagogues? And what secrets hide behind his Aramaic words preserved in the Gospels? Get ready to unravel linguistic mysteries and discover how Jesus' words shaped history in more languages than you might think. Let's dive in. Greek as the lingua franca, the language of the Roman world and Jesus' possible use of it. A multilingual Roman world. In the time of Jesus, language was more than just a means of communication. It was a gateway to culture, power, and identity. The eastern half of the Roman Empire was a place of linguistic diversity, where Greek, Latin, Aramaic, and Hebrew all played significant roles. Among these, Greek, specifically Koine Greek, stood out as the lingua franca, the shared language across cities, cultures, and social classes. Even in Judea and Galilee, where Aramaic dominated everyday life, Greek left a deep imprint on education, trade, administration, and cultural life. This raises a fascinating historical question. Did Jesus speak Greek? And if so, to what extent? To explore this mystery, we need to examine the spread of Greek in the Roman world, Greek's presence in Galilee and Judea, possible evidence of Jesus' exposure to Greek, scholarly debates about his fluency, why it matters for understanding Jesus' life and mission. Let's dive into the story of Greek as the lingua franca and how it shaped the world Jesus knew. 1. The rise of Greek as the lingua franca. Alexander the Great and Hellenization. The story of Greek as the dominant language begins with Alexander the Great. When Alexander set out for Macedonia in 334 BCE, he didn't just conquer lands. He spread Greek language and culture, a process historians call Hellenization. From Egypt to modern-day Pakistan, Alexander's campaigns established Greek-speaking cities, libraries, and marketplaces. Greek became the language of administration, commerce, literature and philosophy, international diplomacy. Even after Alexander's empire fractured, his successors, the Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in Syria and Mesopotamia, continued promoting Greek. Koine Greek, a simplified global language. The Greek spoken across these territories was not the lofty language of Homer or classical Athens. It was Koine Greek, meaning common Greek, a simplified dialect accessible to people from various regions. Koine Greek flattened some regional dialect differences, simplified grammar and vocabulary, integrated foreign words, became the everyday spoken and written Greek of the Hellenistic world. By the 1st century BCE, Koine Greek was firmly established as the lingua franca of the Eastern Mediterranean. 2. Greek in the Roman Empire. When Rome absorbed the Eastern Mediterranean, it inherited not only territories, but also the Greek cultural and linguistic infrastructure. The Romans themselves respected Greek as the language of philosophy, science, medicine, literature. While Latin was the official language of Roman law and military administration, Greek remained dominant in the eastern provinces. Roman officials, merchants, and soldiers often spoke Greek when stationed in the east. Thus, during Jesus' lifetime, early 1st century CE, Greek was the language of international trade, common in urban centers, used in inscriptions, coins, and documents. 3. Greek in Judea and Galilee. Judea, Jerusalem, and Greek influence. In Judea, Greek's presence was significant but uneven. Jerusalem housed Greek-speaking communities, especially among the Jewish diaspora visiting the temple. Greek inscriptions have been found in Jerusalem, including warnings at the temple prohibiting non-Jews from entering the sacred precincts, written in Greek and Latin. Some Jewish high priests and aristocrats were Hellenized, using Greek names and adopting Greek customs. Galilee, a crossroads region. Jesus' homeland, Galilee, was uniquely situated. It bordered Hellenistic cities like Sepphoris and Tiberias. Major roads connected Galilee to broader trade networks. Greek merchants, Roman officials, and diverse ethnic groups lived and worked there. Sepphoris, just a few miles from Nazareth, was a thriving urban center with Greek-style architecture, a theater, and bustling markets. Though predominantly Jewish, it was deeply Hellenized. Tiberias, founded by Herod Antipas around 20 CE on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee, was explicitly Hellenistic in design and orientation. Thus, Greek was common in the cities, but less prevalent in rural villages like Nazareth. However, Galilean villagers regularly traveled to urban centers for trade, taxes, and employment, exposing them to Greek-speaking contexts. 4. Evidence for Jesus' exposure to Greek. Historical context. Given this environment, it's plausible that Jesus heard Greek in market towns, saw Greek inscriptions on coins and buildings, encountered Greek speakers among Roman officials, merchants, and travelers. The Gospels and Greek terms. While the Gospels were composed in Greek, they sometimes preserve details suggesting Jesus' engagement with Greek-speaking people. Interactions with Gentiles. Several Gospel stories involve Jesus speaking with non-Jews. The Syrophoenician woman, Mark 7 verses 24 to 30, was Greek-speaking from the region of Tyre and Sidon. Did Jesus converse with her in Greek or via interpreters? The Roman centurion whose servant Jesus healed, Matthew 8 verses 5 to 13. As a Roman officer, the centurion likely spoke Greek in the eastern provinces. The Gospels do not explicitly record Jesus speaking Greek in these encounters, but the circumstances make it possible. Greek names and terms. Some individuals around Jesus had Greek names. Philip, one of the disciples, is a Greek name. Andrew is also Greek. People like Herodians and Hellenized Jews were accustomed to Greek culture. Additionally, certain Greek words appear untranslated in gospel narratives, suggesting familiarity with Greek culture and terms. The trial before Pilate. During Jesus' trial, he is brought before Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. While Pilate would have known Latin, it's highly probable that Greek served as the common language between Pilate and local elites. If Jesus interacted directly with Pilate, Greek would have been a likely medium, unless interpreters facilitated communication. However, the Gospels do not confirm which language was used. 5. Scholarly debate. Could Jesus speak Greek? Historians and scholars disagree on how much Greek Jesus might have known. The case for Jesus speaking Greek. Some scholars argue Jesus grew up near Sepphoris and Tiberias. He might have worked there as a Tecton builder-carpenter, exposing him to Greek-speaking clients and co-workers. As a traveling teacher, Jesus might have used Greek to reach broader audiences beyond rural Jews. Greek was necessary for dealing with Roman authorities. Proponents suggest Jesus may have possessed basic conversational Greek, sufficient for greetings, commercial transactions, short dialogues. The case for limited or no Greek. Other scholars caution. Jesus' primary audience was Jewish, mostly Aramaic-speaking peasants. Most of his recorded teachings are steeped in Semitic idioms and thought patterns. Jesus' rural upbringing suggests minimal formal Greek education. This view holds that Jesus may have understood some Greek, but not spoken it fluently. Interpreters likely facilitated conversations with Greek speakers. 6. Greek education and literacy. Hellenistic education, paideia. Learning Greek was part of the Hellenistic educational system known as paideia, which included reading and writing Greek, studying literature and rhetoric, learning Greek philosophy and ethics. This education was typically available to urban elites, merchants, aristocratic families. As a rural artisan's son from Nazareth, Jesus probably did not receive formal Greek schooling. However, he may have absorbed practical Greek through daily exposure. 7. Greek and the early Christian movement. Regardless of Jesus' personal fluency, Greek became the vehicle for spreading his message. The Septuagint. The Septuagint LXX was a Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, produced in Alexandria in the 3rd to 2nd centuries BCE. It was widely used among Greek-speaking Jews, quoted extensively in the New Testament. When early Christians preached Jesus as Messiah, they often cited the Septuagint rather than the Hebrew text, since their audiences spoke Greek. Greek as the language of evangelism. The rapid spread of Christianity across the Roman Empire depended on Greek. Paul's letters were written in Greek. The Gospels were composed in Greek. Greek philosophical concepts helped shape early Christian theology. Without Greek as a lingua franca, the message of Jesus might have remained confined to Aramaic-speaking regions. 8. Greek in material culture. Inscriptions. Archaeology confirms Greek's presence across the region. The temple warning inscription in Jerusalem was in Greek and Latin, cautioning non-Jews not to enter certain areas. Tomb inscriptions around Jerusalem and Galilee appear in Greek, especially among Hellenized Jews. Coins. Coins minted by Herodian rulers often bore Greek inscriptions, reinforcing Greek's status in economic life. Urban architecture. Cities like Sepphoris and Tiberias featured Greek theaters, gymnasiums, and marketplaces. Public life in these urban centers operated largely in Greek. 9. Why it matters. Jesus in Greek. The universal scope of his mission. The possibility of Jesus knowing Greek speaks to the universal dimension of his message. While he ministered primarily among Jews, his teachings laid the groundwork for a faith that would transcend ethnic and linguistic boundaries. Understanding gospel texts. Recognizing the Greek environment helps. Explain why the Gospels were written in Greek. Understand how Jesus' teachings were adapted for Greek-speaking audiences. Reveal how Greek philosophical and ethical terms entered early Christian thought. Bridging cultures. Jesus lived at a cultural crossroads. Even if he primarily taught in Aramaic, his world was deeply affected by Greek thought, politics, and language. Acknowledging this cultural fusion enriches our understanding of parables and metaphors that might have resonated with Hellenistic listeners. The transformation of a Jewish movement into a global faith. A multilingual Messiah? The question of whether Jesus spoke Greek remains partially speculative, but history provides a nuanced picture. Greek was unquestionably present in Jesus' world as the lingua franca. Jesus, growing up in Galilee, would have encountered Greek in urban centers, commerce, and administration. The Gospels leave open the possibility of Jesus interacting in Greek with non-Jews and Roman officials. Even if Jesus' Greek was limited, his message ultimately transcended language barriers. The New Testament's Greek composition ensured that his teachings reached the farthest corners of the Roman world. In the end, Jesus stands at the crossroads of languages. Aramaic, his mother tongue. Hebrew, the sacred language of Scripture. Greek, the global language carrying his message across the empire. Understanding Greek as the lingua franca helps us appreciate how a Jewish rabbi from Nazareth became a figure whose words would echo in churches, synagogues, universities, and countless languages for millennia. Latin? Probably not, The language of Roman power and Jesus, likely linguistic context. The question of Latin in Jesus' world. When we think of the Roman Empire, Latin often comes to mind as the defining language of law, government, and military power. After all, Rome's imperial authority spread across Europe, the Mediterranean, and beyond for centuries, imprinting Latin on history and culture. Yet when it comes to the life and ministry of Jesus of Nazareth, who lived in Roman-controlled Judea and Galilee during the 1st century CE, the question arises, did Jesus speak Latin? The short answer is, almost certainly not. Latin was the official language of Roman administration, but was far less common in daily provincial life, especially in the eastern provinces like Judea. Moreover, there is very little historical or textual evidence that Jesus ever spoke or understood Latin. This article explores the role of Latin in the Roman Empire, the linguistic realities of 1st century Judea and Galilee, evidence about Jesus' language skills, why Latin was unlikely to be part of Jesus' daily life, the significance of this for understanding the cultural and political world Jesus inhabited. 1. Latin, the language of Rome and Empire. Origins and spread of Latin. Latin originated as the language of the people living in and around Rome in central Italy. As Rome expanded from a city-state to a sprawling empire, Latin grew in influence. It became the official language of the Roman Senate and legal courts, military command and communication, official inscriptions and documents. Latin was also the language of Roman literature, poetry, and history, producing great authors like Cicero, Virgil, and Julius Caesar. Latin and provincial administration. In the western provinces, modern France, Spain, and parts of North Africa and Britain, Latin became dominant as Roman control deepened. It blended with local dialects to form the Romance languages we know today: Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian. In contrast, the eastern provinces, including Judea, were different. The linguistic landscape of the East was shaped by Greek, Aramaic, Hebrew, and other local languages. 2. Judea and Galilee, a multilingual province. The Roman province of Judea. By the 1st century CE, Judea was a Roman province under direct Roman rule or client kings. The Roman presence was symbolized by governors like Pontius Pilate, Roman soldiers stationed at forts, Roman-style cities like Caesarea Maritima. Languages in daily life. Despite Roman control, Latin was not the everyday language of the people. Aramaic was the dominant spoken language among Jews, used in homes and marketplaces. Hebrew was the language of scripture, prayer, and religious scholarship. Greek served as the lingua franca of trade, education, and interethnic communication in cities and along trade routes. Latin was used primarily by Roman officials and soldiers, certain administrative functions, military commands, but the vast majority of the Jewish population probably had little direct contact with Latin. 3. Evidence about Latin in Jesus' time and region. Archaeological and epigraphical evidence. Latin inscriptions have been found in the region, including official Roman milestones, military diplomas, inscriptions on coins. However, these are generally official or military artifacts, not evidence of Latin spoken or read by common people. The Temple Warning Inscription. One notable Latin text discovered in Jerusalem was the Temple Warning Inscription, carved in Latin and Greek, warning Gentiles not to enter the temple's sacred precincts. This shows that Latin was used officially and ceremonially, but it does not mean it was a language of the masses or local Jewish teachers. For Jesus' background and likely language exposure. Jesus' social status and environment. Jesus was born in Nazareth, a small village in rural Galilee, into a working-class family. His father Joseph was traditionally understood as a carpenter techton. It is unlikely that Jesus, growing up in such a setting, would have been exposed to Latin beyond rare occasions. His social and economic environment suggests a primarily Aramaic-speaking context, occupation, and travel. If Jesus worked as a carpenter or builder, he may have occasionally traveled to nearby towns or cities, where Greek and possibly some Latin could be encountered. However, there is no historical evidence suggesting Jesus had any formal education in Latin or used it in his teaching or ministry. 5. Jesus' ministry and language. Primary language, Aramaic. The Gospels preserve several Aramaic phrases spoken by Jesus, underscoring Aramaic as his main spoken language. Examples include Talitha Mark 5 verse 41, Eloi Eloi lema sabachthani, Mark 15 verse 34. These suggest Jesus' day-to-day language was Aramaic, Hebrew for scripture and worship. Jesus read and referenced Hebrew scriptures in synagogues, Luke 4 verses 16 to 20, indicating proficiency in Hebrew for religious purposes. Greek interactions. Jesus likely encountered Greek, especially in urban centers like Sepphoris or Tiberias, or when dealing with Gentiles and Roman authorities. Some scholars believe he may have understood or spoken basic Greek. 6. Why Jesus probably did not speak Latin. Latin's limited reach in the East. Latin was primarily the language of Roman officials, soldiers, and administrators. They often relied on Greek interpreters to communicate with local populations. Many provincial governors were Greek-speaking, and Greek was the working language of administration in the Eastern Mediterranean. Thus, the average Jew in Judea and Galilee would have little to no need to learn Latin. Lack of Latin words or phrases in the Gospels. If Jesus had spoken Latin, we might expect some Latin terms or expressions to have survived in the Gospels. Instead, the only foreign words preserved are Aramaic and a few Greek. 7. Roman authorities and language use. The role of Pontius Pilate. Pilate, the Roman governor who presided over Jesus' trial, was a Roman official whose first language was Latin. Yet he would have used Greek to communicate with local Jewish leaders and probably relied on interpreters. This means that Jesus and Pilate likely did not speak Latin directly. Roman soldiers and Latin. Roman soldiers stationed in Judea likely spoke Latin among themselves. However, they also learned some Greek or Aramaic to interact with locals. 8. Latin in early Christianity. Latin as the language of the Western Church. After Christianity spread westward, Latin became the dominant language of the Western Church and theology. St. Jerome's Latin Vulgate Bible, completed in the late 4th century CE, became the authoritative Latin translation. But early Jesus followers spoke Aramaic and Greek. The earliest followers of Jesus in Jerusalem and Judea spoke Aramaic and Greek, not Latin. 9. Implications. Understanding Jesus' linguistic context. Jesus in a multilingual environment. Jesus lived in a highly multilingual world, but his ministry focused primarily on Aramaic-speaking Jewish communities. The importance of Aramaic and Hebrew. The languages Jesus spoke and taught connect him directly to Jewish tradition and scripture. Latin as a language of power, not of the people. Latin symbolizes the imperial power of Rome, but was largely foreign to the daily life and speech of Jewish peasants in Judea and Galilee. 10. Latin? Probably not. While Latin was the language of Rome and official administration, it was not the language Jesus spoke. His primary languages were Aramaic for daily life and teaching, Hebrew for religious scripture and synagogue reading, possibly some Greek for interactions with Gentiles and urban dwellers. Latin remained mostly a language of Roman officials and soldiers. There is no historical evidence Jesus spoke Latin, and it is highly unlikely he did. Understanding this linguistic context helps us appreciate Jesus' identity as a Jewish teacher rooted deeply in the languages and culture of his people, rather than in the language of Rome's imperial rulers. Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey into the Aramaic mystery. Was Jesus really bilingual? We've explored ancient languages, cultural crossroads, and the echoes of Jesus' own words. Whether speaking Aramaic, reading Hebrew, or perhaps conversing in Greek, Jesus' linguistic world was richer than many imagine. What do you think? Was he truly multilingual? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this dive into history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more mysteries of faith, language, and ancient times. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep seeking the truth.